Hey everyone, so today my goal is to get a good look inside this engine and see what we've got going on inside there. So, I mean, the biggest indicator would be pulling off the head, being able to look in there and then, taking the cover off from the back side. But I think this video I'm going to cover taking a lot of this stuff off in order to get total vertical access to get it out. So some of this I'm just going to take off kind of in assemblies. So like the whole oil bath here, I'm going to take this bolt off. I think there's two more back here. And we'll pull that whole thing off as one. Have to undo that rubber hose first to undo this line going to the governor, and then I'll disassemble that later and clean that out later. Right now my focus is on getting to this engine. So here we go. Alright, so we got the whole air cleaner or oil bath assembly off. This is actually a stud in here, which is kind of nice. So I took this bolt out, this nut off first, so that, it's still being held on over here. And once you take this nut off, you can slide it off. That'll be nice getting it back on, so you can kind of hold it while you get this one in. And then from the carb, rather than taking the rubber boot off, if you wanted to, you could just undo these two bolts here coming out of the carburetor, and that whole assembly comes off. So now I'm going to go ahead and take the carb off, and I'll probably come back here and take this upper water pipe off, which is just the 4 bolts, 2 on each side, and the exhaust. Those look like those will be a little fun. We might break those bolts, but that'll be okay. All right. Okay, so we got the upper water pipe off. Got the carb off. Now I got the upper water pipe off, or I'm sorry, start really with the other side. I got the exhaust off first, since that was, on the far right side, easily accessible. And I got the upper water pipe off, these 4 bolts, and then the rubber boot. And that made it easy to get to this bolt back here, but I mean, you can do whatever you want. But from the other side, it's just easy access then. You can have the carb off. So at this point, I think I might wait to see if I really need to take the fan shaft assembly off right this second. So I'm going to go ahead and take this tube off and get the valve cover head off. Alright, so here's what we got. Again, I know I've said this before, but it just kind of is interesting to see compared to my B that I redone, just how big, these components are, just in perspective. What's interesting just by visual inspection, different from the B, is you don't have the oil tappet or whatever you want to call it that reaches up from the head and oils these rockers. So I'm curious to see how these get oil. I wonder if they actually have a channel in them. Anyway, we'll take the tap assembly off here, these 2 big nuts, and that should come off. Alright, so we got the tappet assembly off here. Like I said, it's just interesting, different from my B. You have these cups on 2 of these, and not these. I'll have to think about which that is. So that's the exhaust by the looks of it, I think. So yeah, have to understand later why that is, or if any of you guys know, just go ahead and comment. Alright, so we'll take off this lower water pipe here, 2 bolts, This is just an O-ring interface here, but we'll take off this whole lower pipe, and then I'll go ahead and loosen all of the head bolts, take out our push rods, and see what we got underneath here. Alright, so we got the head off here, and a few interesting things that I noticed. These studs, I don't know if you can tell in the video here, they've got like pipe wrench marks on. I don't think that's factory. So I have a feeling somebody's replaced these before. And same thing for all these head bolts. They're way too new. They are not original. And I have more evidence that this was all torn apart here in a minute that I'll get to. But yeah, came apart pretty easily. Everything looks pretty good. I got a guy coming tomorrow to look at some other blocks and heads that I have to see if they're any good to sell from a parts place I got. But the bores look really good. There's really hardly any lip here. I mean, you can barely even see it, let alone feel it. You can actually see it better there, but it's real smooth. So, boy, I wonder, cross my fingers, how lucky I'll get here. So I took this apart, or took the cover off, and boy, I thought those connecting rods are nice and shiny. Those are connecting rods, I believe, from the 70. So somebody updated those. They are not in the G parts book. So I think they pulled them from a 70. With this being a 49, it should have the connecting rods, I believe, with the Babbitt and the shims. Well, somebody updated them so that they have these connecting rods with the inserts. So I like that. The Pistons, I was able to reach my camera in there, take a picture. They are still the standard bore Pistons. They are, I think, replacements though. I'd have to look back at the parts book again. But it's still the standard bore, which is interesting. So it makes me wonder if somebody had this all apart before. Rotating my camera. Somebody had this all apart before. It didn't need reboard then, or I don't know how to tell if it's got sleeves in it. I think you'd see it. The gear and everything looks like it was cleaned up nicely. I don't know, so I'm curious to see what all we got going on in here. But somebody's been in here, somebody's put some money into it. So to me that is some good news, because hopefully things aren't too bad and won't need to replace much. So I'm going to wait till that guy comes tomorrow, see what he thinks, and if I'll even need to hone it out or what I should do with it. And we'll go from there. Alright, so an update after doing some research and digging into things a little bit more. So I said that these were still standard bore Pistons. However, they are the gas only Pistons. So if you look in the parts book, there were Pistons that you could put on aftermarket, but from John Deere, like I said, they're in the parts book, that were for gas only. It raises the compression ratio from, I think someone said, 4-to-1 to 5.5-to-1. So it's kind of interesting. When I got this, and you know, I didn't have it running very much, but I thought it had some real thump to it. Now I know everyone says these G sound different. I agree they do. They have a good, nice sound to them. But this thing really thumped. So between that, the higher compression Pistons, and quite possibly, so I had that gentleman out here looking. he thinks, let's see if I can get a look in here. He thinks that cam, it was certainly welded up. You can see some heat lines on it, but he thinks that the cam could potentially be, ground a little bit, give it a little more oomph to it. So that could explain something. So that's good. Again, somebody's put some money into it. Also, while I was looking in here, check out that oil coupler. Yeah, we're gonna replace that thing. It still works, but we'll tear that oil pump out at some point. So I'm gonna take off one of these connecting rod caps, make sure the bearings look good in at least one of them, but I'm sure they will be. I got the flywheel back on just so I could turn the motor over and look at it. Gonna check out the valves, so we'll take the whole head out of here. Probably reseat the valves a little bit. Put in all new manifolds in, or all new gaskets in, including the intake manifold. I debated whether I want to change this or not. It's pretty good cost to change it. And it's a pain to have to, if you ever have to replace this later, taking all this apart again, the way these tractors are designed. Unless you just put bolts in them all. This is one stud, but the rest are just bolts. So technically you could pop it off and switch it out pretty easily if it weren't for this one stud here. So yeah, I think my next move here is just to get a look inside this governor. Now, this special cap here was for a tachometer. You had a tachometer cable that went in here based on the shaft of the governor, and it mounted somewhere up here. That gentleman got looking, and it's straight shaft. So either somebody replaced the shaft and didn't change this end, or they got this end from somewhere else. I don't know. I'm just going to put a cap on it. So I want to take this governor off, flip it over, get a look inside, and since I need to replace the radiator gaskets, we're just going to go ahead and take this whole fan shaft assembly off. So that's the next move here. Alright, so getting the fan shaft assembly off was a little interesting. First off, you've got all your bolts that attach your governor on. Now, two of these bolts are shoulder bolts. I don't know if shoulder is really the right term, because I don't know that it really seats on that. I think it's just it's just kind of an alignment bolt. There was one there and there was one there. I believe this one is supposed to be back here. The only thing I really gained actually, no, that might be right. You want two that are the farthest away. I'm looking at it, those might be your two farthest, so that might be right. When you go to lift this up, there is an oil coupler here. I'll show you the other side here in a minute. That just comes apart, but when you go to put it back together, you gotta make sure that lines up. But then there is an oil line here, and the nut will be, it kind of fell down in there once I unscrewed it. So yeah. You lift this thing up about an inch, and then you're able to get to this nut and then the nut to the coupler, which again I'll show you here in a second. Before you can lift that off or do much, you need to undo your two square bolts and square nuts that are here. I mean, that's where you want to take it off. That's where I want to take it off, because when I take it off, then it acts as a stand for the fan blade. You need to take your fan shroud housing off. I forgot to do that first. You can't take it off and out. You can just loosen it and kind of set it back. Then take that all off as one, and then take the fan shroud off once you have it off the tractor. I loosened the generator, got the belt off. So yeah, so let's look inside here. You can see this is common anytime the tractor sits for a while. Wherever water gets on it, condensation, what have you, it'll rust in kind of one spot like that. The gear up here is kind of the same. It's not great, but it's usable. You rotate them, you know, all of these ones are fine. I don't know, seems okay. Again, not perfect, not ideal, but completely functional. If anything, these up here show a little more than I'd like, but the face of them are really good. So I think that's okay. Weights, nice and free. They look good. Bearings look good. So yeah, pretty pleased with that. Here is the coupler that meets, like I said. And then here is your oil line. So that's interesting. I undid it here, but after looking at it, the way that nut drops way down in the bottom, I wonder if it would have been easier to undo this. Sorry, the focus is not working very well to undo this one out, but I think I did okay taking that one off. So yeah, here it's, I don't know, probably leave it as is. Alright, so a friend told me, you know, while I had this part, go ahead and take the exhaust manifold off and replace the gasket. Well, here I am with broken studs, as I figured. So that one snapped. I couldn't get over. This one came out. Now both of these go down into the coolant channel. I guess you can see it there. That one was just the original stud. That came right off. In fact, it was loose. And this one actually had to pry up a little bit once I got the others and saws all that off. Because what happened was, if you remember, that chunk is out of there. Well, that bolt pretty much rusted in there. So I'm going to have to drill that out. I've come to realize, I think this is a pretty unique manifold. You can get your aftermarket ones, of course, but they actually look totally different. They probably make more sense, because the exhaust on the aftermarket ones, like the Murphys, comes up and around, and then they both go out. And then the intake just comes in and goes in, just comes in the middle here like this, but at a lower elevation. So yeah, okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and get this planed off, order parts, get this drilled out, and maybe start getting this back together. We'll see.